Gut, einen schönen guten Abend hier. Wir treffen uns heute zur 4. Ringvorlesung Islamismus in Deutschland. Ich freue mich sehr, dass wir einen gut gefüllten Saal haben und ich hoffe auch einige Leute jenseits des Saals. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass Sie hier bei uns dabei sind. Ich bin vom Projekt RIRA und wir machen dies zusammen mit RADIS, das das Überprojekt ist, dieser Radikalisierungslinie. Und wir werden heute einen Vortrag von Sabrina Zajak hören, worüber ich mich sehr freue und freue mich, dass sie auch hierher gekommen ist, den weiten Weg aus Berlin und sogar ohne, dass der Zug liegen geblieben ist. Und ich freue mich auch, dass Sie hier sind. Und jetzt gebe ich zur Vorstellung weiter an Radis und bin weg.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Pückel. I will speak in English so that everyone in the live stream could understand, since today's presentation is also in English. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to see you all here today, both in person and also in the live stream. My name is Shaima Abdella, and I am a research associate at the RADIS project in the Peace Research Institute, Frankfurt. So RADIS is a research network that focuses on the causes and effects of Islamism in Germany and Europe. It encompasses 12 different interdisciplinary research projects across Germany, and it's funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the BMBF in Germany. Today's lecture is presented by Professor Dr. Sabrina Zajak. She's the head of the RAMI project. More about the abbreviation is going to follow up shortly. She's also the head of the Consensus and Conflict Department at the DeZIM-Institut, and she's an associate professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Ruhr-Universität Bochum. Today's lecture is entitled Radicalized Mainstream, Mobilizing, Normalizing, and Normativizing Far-Right Ideologies from the Center. The discussion will follow after the presentation, but it will not be live streamed. So after the presentation, we're sorry for everyone in the live stream, but due to data protection reasons, we will end the live stream shortly afterwards. And without further ado, I will now give the floor to Professor Zajak. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. So I guess today's presentation presumably will be very different to those you heard in the past on radicalization, radical Islam, Islamism, because actually today I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about today is the radicalized mainstream. And if you say now, oh, what is that? That sounds so ridiculous. It's an oxymoron, it can't exist. Radical and mainstream, these are two opposing things. It doesn't make any sense. Please stay with me. What I try to do in the next 45 minutes is try to make a point that it does exist and it is connected to Islamism and the far right. And basically it is about, the presentation will be today about how the frames of the Islam as radical is used for the normalization of far-right ideologies into what I will call a radicalized mainstream. So what I want to do today, I need to click, hold on. And maybe if you see that slide, I jump in with that one, maybe then you see that slide, and I guess you all have had discussions in your private life, in academia life, about the recent elections, not only the European elections, but the communal elections in Germany. And if you see that slide, maybe you think, okay, radicalized mainstream, maybe the concept intuitively makes more sense. But don't worry, I'm not going to talk about the elections today, but I will end with the elections at the end of my presentation. So first, I would like to discuss and introduce the concept radicalized mainstream. But before I jump into positioning this concept into existing literature, I would like to introduce the RAMI project, which was that project, part of the RADIS community projects, where that idea was basically born. And then I jump into the empirical finding and some of the selections of what we have been doing in the RAMI project from our media studies, from our qualitative fieldwork, and I add some insight of recent opinion surveys before I end my presentation today. So that is the team. It is very interdisciplinary. From the University of Münster, we had from the Center for Religion and Modernity, from the Institute, from the University of Bochum, the Institute for Social Movements. This is a historical institute, so we also had an historical perspective on how the far right and the frames of the Islam as radical, as non-European, as a radical other, has its very historical roots, which has past dependencies upon the framing of it of today, but I'm not going to talk about that in that presentation, and the DeZIM-Institut, the team of the DeZIM-Institut. So basically, in the RAMI, which is called from the Rand, from the fringes to the middle, from Rand in die Mitte, the idea is to shift research on radical Islam to research on the construction of the Islam as radical. We basically started out with two hypotheses in the project. Escalating resentments and fears, the radical Islam narratives is a mainstreaming tool of the far right, and the far right narratives of the Islam as radical is a key component of their anti-Muslim racism and is used to support the normalization of far right ideologies in society. So these were some two starting points for the project, and then we decided to do it in different packages, basically looking into the mainstream and the normalization of far-right interpretation of Islam in mass media, using media discourse analysis based on newspaper analysis. Second, to look into the mechanisms of normalization of the far-right and its link to Islam in a local field studies based on qualitative data. And third, we had the historical package, but what I also added now, because we did a survey 2 months ago, I brought some data from a recent survey on the normalization of the AfD. So basically, we had a couple of research questions, whether and how far-right interpretations of Islam as radical change public discourse, thereby pushing for the normalization of intolerance and racism against migrants and Muslims. That is connected to the media data. What is the composition, figuration, and concrete meaning of the radicalized mainstream, and how does that radicalized mainstream become articulated and activated in local context? And what role do which local actors play in the normalization of those ideologies? And how far, if we measure it today, is that normalization spread in public opinion? Basically, the whole research design of the RAMI project was an international comparison of 4 countries. We made case selections for different reasons. I'm not going to talk about all the countries today because it's simply too much. My main focus is on Germany, although I look into broader international debate, into broader debates from all countries in the media data. We are just finally compiling our book where you can find all the results in different chapters, and it will be published already. It will be published this autumn. And these are the different chapters of the book. So, in search of the radicalized mainstream, of course, because it is a new label, I called it In Search Of, when we had a conference wherein we invited a lot of researchers to discuss if this concept makes sense or maybe not, and how it relates to other concepts. So how it relates to other literatures and ideas. And there are so much studies out there. There's such a huge universe of literature, in particular on the far right. It's impossible to quote everything. I had a quote on a slide which says, just in the last, I think, 10 years, there are over 6,000 publications in Europe or something at all. But we say, okay, we have 2 types of, let's say, broad divisions here. Basically, one type of research on the far right, looking into how it is moving from the margins to the center. So that is a particular view on particular dynamics. If I look at actors, ideologies, strategies, mobilizations, and so forth. But I think it's something which has been isolated, which has been in certain circles, the extreme sides, when we talk about extremism, the extreme poles in societies. And then it's somehow trying to win more people, more voters, more movement members, more civil society actors. So somehow it's moving from the margins to the center. Then there is a different type of research, very different type of research, and we at the DeZIM-Institut, in my institute, we do a lot of that on research, is on racism and discrimination, anti-Muslim racism as well, but also on other groups, and the actors and institutions rather considering as racism as attitudes which are ingrained in institutions, have very historical path dependencies, and which have always been there, independently of far-right actors, but they are using it a lot. And somehow our project is located somehow in the middle, because we would like to look at the middle, or the mainstream. And of course, that is also not something new, because there's a huge literature on that, what is called research on what is the mainstream and what is normalizing. Mainstreaming and normalizing as two processes which we can observe. So basically, the research on far-right mainstreaming looks at strategies of the far-right, where they try to adapt their positions and refer it to the mainstream, to the norm, somehow, in order to create resonance. You see all these discussions: taboos are broken in public discourse, democracy is challenged from within, and so forth. But it's still in this idea that it is a process where some actors and ideologies move into the mainstream. And normalization really looks at how, on the social norms, and how conventions and moral values being challenged subsequently and slowly, and changing in discursive shift. So this is very much connected to the discursive narrative shifts. Both have no focus particular in Islam or Muslims, or anti-Muslim racism in particular. That is not their specific topic. This is something we also bring into this topic. But take a little closer look to the idea of normalization. This is really about the incorporation of fringe ideologies into the mainstream, not only of politics, but also in popular culture and other fields. The transformation from words into some kinds of actions. The adoption of mainstream parties of the far-right agenda, leading to the exclusive focus in migration and refugee politics, and something which Ruth called shameless normalization, understood as the integration of marginal ideology into the mainstream in all these different fields. So, based on that, we thought, okay, that is all well and good ideas, but we would like to stress the idea of radicalized mainstream. First of all, because the ideas so far take mainstream intentionally often as something which responds to far-right actors. It's like an empty shelf, and then people come, and then they get mobilized and so forth, and we say, whatever, how you define the mainstream, but there are a lot of people, actors, which are also part of this normalization process. So the mainstream is nothing neutral, passive, or static. It is constructed and contingent and fluid. The mainstream, or in Germany, much more connected mainstream is very, the international debate. In Deutschland, it's very much the middle. Die Mitte-Studie, very well known also here. The Mitte, what is the Mitte? The mainstream itself is no longer a normative point of reference, but an increasingly contested concept. And that was also the point. Andreas Zick, he was also at our workshop there to discuss it, also made the point that the middle itself becomes an increasingly contested concept. And the mainstreaming of the far right and the radicalization of the mainstream are different and distinctly different phenomena. This is something we would suggest. So if we say so, we not only need to look at the word mainstream, we also need to look at the word radical when we say radical mainstream. So radicalization to us is not a phenomenon which is necessarily connected to physical violence or even terrorism. Radicalization for us, we use a concept of Hafez and Mullin, but also others, refers to the gradual process of entering an increasingly extreme belief system, but this can be very subtle and sometimes, and in case of radicalized mainstream, totally unreflected. People not even sometimes realize what's happening with them. So basically, it's like the normalization of ideologies of unequal worth, so the Heidmeyer's Ideologien der Ungleichheit, Wertigkeit, and it is not solely or necessarily even linked to the far right, but somehow connected. And events, crisis, and conflict can activate it, and can activate it and link it to already pre-existing racisms or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism and nationalism and other ideologies in society. So basically we use it as a heuristic concept. So the idea was to use it in a heuristic concept which can be used, which serves different purposes. So basically, of course, it should be considered as a multidimensional concept with cognitive, behavioral, political, discursive, and social institutional dimensions. But it should also refer to that it is something latent which can manifest itself. They say there is something underlying which can be easily activated. And you see something when people get surprised, it's like, oh wow, I didn't expect it. Maybe the results in some municipal levels of the winds of the idea, where people say, oh, well, this is surprising in that context. Yeah, if you look at it through the lenses of normalization or radicalized mainstream, it is less unexpected, maybe. Genau. So basically, it's really tracing this normalization process, but also the invisible, or trying at least to grab some of the invisible parts and unreflected adoptions of certain ways of thinking about something. And basically, the idea is to show that the mainstream itself is a contested concept and not the norm, by bringing in the perspective of marginalized and vulnerable groups, such as the Muslim community, for example. And it might, or it is also intended to point towards a new quality we see today of, or in cases where sometimes even the tipping point is crossed. Question mark, huh? At least in some villages or some regions where what has been radical has been so normalized that it has become the new normal, meaning we don't see it, that it has been radical before, or has been framed as a radical ideology before. Okay, I jumped now to the empirical material to show what I mean with my introduction so far. So basically, the main theme that we look into the media, because the media are those areas where you see discursive developments and discursive shifts. And here, this analysis did Liriam Sponholz, my colleague from communication science. So what she did is really this statistical, quantitative communication science stuff. But basically, it really looks into the discursive activation of the radicalized mainstream with the idea that the media plays a central role. And of course, there are country-specific dynamics, but there are also transnationally similar structures. This is why we looked at different countries, and you will see what I mean in a minute. And events play a very crucial role, and for the framing of the Islam as radical terror attacks, terrorist events played a very, very crucial role. So basically, we did a quantitative analysis of media articles on Islam and Muslim in 6 quality mainstream media articles in Germany on the Welt SZ, France, Le Figaro, Libération, and UK Times and Guardian. The Italian case is not included here. Overall, gathering not a little less than 300,000 articles. And then we analyzed them in 3 steps. We first constructed a dictionary on Islam and Muslim, the Islam and Muslim dictionary, and looked on how salient the topic is. Yeah? So how often it is discussed and what are the core peaks. Second step, we analyzed those peaks 7 days after the peaks and compared the peaks to a randomly chosen normal time frame to see how the debates after the peaks are different through the methods of co-occurrence network analysis. And fourth, we took again a selection of 2,700 articles and used manual coding of actors and frames in these selective articles. And I show you just a few results of what we did. And of course, we are not the first ones doing it, because there's a lot of research on Muslims, Islam, the media, and terror attacks, and how Muslims and Islam is portrayed in the media. And we find, for example, Islam and Muslims are often depicted mostly negatively in news. linked to violence, to terrorism, portrayed as radical in the media of Western societies, emphasizing Muslim otherness and dealing with the topic of terrorism directly into this. So there's a lot of research already going on looking into that. And then there's a second track of research linking it, focusing particularly on terrorist attacks. And I found, so this is an interesting finding. So there's a lot of reasons why terrorist attacks gain so much media attention. For example, number of casualties, the place, the identity of the victims, the identity of terrorists. But when you look, when terrorist attacks connected to Muslims generate 375% more news stories than attacks by non-Muslims. That's not something we found, but that's from a literature source. So, but I thought this is very interesting. Genau. And also, when you compare those different types, this is again other research they did, you see that non-Islamist motivated perpetrators are more often portrayed as in personalized ways, like the mental illnesses and so forth. And if it's a Muslim perpetrator, that is portrayed as, oh, this is Islam, this is the radical Islam. Very different types of frames. So to all these existing types of research on that matter, on that topic, we bring in this perspective, refocusing on the radicalized mainstream perspective means linking that type of research to the idea of the normalizing of the far right. So basically, this is the data set we have. This is only showing that, of course, newspapers portray something differently. There are differences in how often Islam and Muslims receive media attention over time in different regions, countries, and newspapers. But you see already here, it is already indicated that there are some similar patterns. And these patterns here, you can you see what the similar patterns are. You see that although the attacks have been in different countries, across countries, they have been very strong carrier pushing the Islam and Muslim topics on the agenda. So very strong drivers. That means, in contrast, so the peaks, these are, the rest of the black things is like all the other newspapers, yeah, where those words are present, but the peaks are really, really high by far. That means that a lot of the debate is really shaped through those events. And here you see again the overview that, of course, if there is an attack in one country, you see a lot more reports in that country on that attack. But you still see reports on attacks in all countries, or in all our countries we're looking at. And so we did that for every country, and we did that in very different things, but I just want to give you one example of this co-occurrent networks, because they are a little bit complicated to understand. So basically, on the left side, you see this random sample of articles 2010, where Islam and Muslims were discussed. And you see different things, in particular in contrast to how it was discussed right after Bataclan in November 2025. Oh God, oh my God. Please ignore that. Okay, okay. This is nothing in the future. So basically what you see here is the debate we had in 2010, if some of you might remember, about is Islam part of this whole thing about light culture. But really, if you look into the articles, it was really about what it means to be German, right? So the center stage was not what is Islam, but it was about what is German, and it is somehow connected. Being German and Islam is somehow connected, maybe rejected, maybe integrated somehow, but this is a debate, yeah? And it is connected to other religions. So it was debated how it is linked to Judaism, the ideas of families, what means Muslimhood, it is connected to the idea of culture, what means the West, what is culture, what are others, what is the whole. So basically you see a very different debate, but it's really about integration, being German and so forth. And in that debate, Islam played a role, being Muslim played a role in various ways. And suddenly, afterwards, Muslim was at the so everything was focusing only on that, and then right with them. There are bad Muslims. Okay, there are also good Muslims. There are bad Muslims. They are connected. And so forth. Orban, so the politician in Die Welt, the newspaper, who gained most attention in the time was the Hungarian politician. Stressing always he close the border, so making it really about security, and securing Europe, and then other links in the report about how to make Germany more secure and so forth. So you see very different things. Basically, after Bataclan, as the media attention is really triggered by this one event, raising a convergence of the security agenda, putting Muslims in the spotlight and very essentializing them. And that's path dependency. I just took, and it's a German quote, but I guess most of you can read from Die Welt today, like this January, this year. It says, der politische Islam als Gefährdung der westlichen Gesellschaftsordnung. And still again, it is quoted from an Hungarian politician who makes similar claims. Yeah? So you see path dependencies from that past until today. And that is why we think you really see a discursive shift on that. And this is not connected to Islam or Muslims, but it is really connected to the normalization agenda driven by media and other actors. So that is why we also looked more into the actor constellations more closely. And this was manual coding, where we looked on how different types of actors linked Islam and terrorism and positioned themselves to it. So maybe the good news is that, first of all, you see it's not stable, it's not linear. Yeah? It's always, but that's not surprising. So it's not a linear development. It comes in waves. And some actors are less involved and some more, and then in different times more or less. So it's changing. For example, the government is lower when it, that's only German news, yeah, the different events from the German news. And most interesting in terms of the normalization debate is the common people. And here you see over time, it's also time development. I agree that Islam and terrorism somehow interlinked through different frames. I agree that it was very low. So even at 9/11, it was little like that, like reflected. Then somehow it got really high. And here we also did it as statements defining Islam as a matter of backwardness, and I brought some examples. Apologies for re-stressing those, but I wanted to give at least some examples of what that means when we look at this data, like sentences in the media like Islam is a completely failed in terms of civilization. Islam does not belong to Europe, which causes enlightenment. These are the statements where we looked into positions of the different actors to that. And for example, this is a quote from England, that is a report, but it's interesting because it showed that Islamophobic incidents, so it has a real life impact. It shows like Islamophobic incidents rose by 375% in the week after Boris Johnson compared veiled Muslim women to letterboxes. Yeah, so that's a quote from England. It's not a proof of we did, but it already shows it also has a real life impact. So I would stop now with the media and look into our qualitative studies and where we looked and how this plays actually out in the local setting. Mass media is a context, there are discourses, there are a lot of words, but what it means in actions. And basically, what we tried here is to try to grasp what is this normalization, or where can we actually see the radicalized mainstream. And these are just really examples I would like to bring along, because these are very heterogeneous groups of the mainstream, and they have different roles and functions. Sometimes it's conscious or subconscious silence, passivity, and ignorance. And there are multiple and contradictional and even unintentional ways of articulating radicalized mainstream by administration, politics, civil society, ordinary citizens. And we were also looking into local context factors, and we found that in particular the economic context matters a lot. The lack of resources plays a crucial role for those developments. And here I just bring a few examples to highlight what I mean. So one quote from civil society actor in a village says, it's linked to the AfD as the new democratic norm. When you publicly criticize right-wing populist politics, you're often accused for calling for undemocratic means. Yeah? So basically, what that person from like the progressive civil society spectrum would like to raise concerns, and but then he feels or gets attacked of being undemocratic. A second phenomenon I would like to call like re-marginalizing or decentering from the middle through re-othering is a case where this was a local politician, a local Turkish politician who has been in politics, who has been shaping politics, who has been an accepted politician for what he has been doing. And suddenly it came back and he said, when I stand up for the rights of migrants and Muslims in the city, I am accused by local city authorities of pursuing a Turkish thing. So basically, he's essentialized in a way and othered in a way that he's reduced to only doing one thing instead of trying to fight for the local community, which he has been accepted for doing before. What I also found very insight, or like a good example for that radicalized mainstream, the threats as the new normal. One told me during the elections campaign for the recent elections, when I told them I felt threatened, they said, stellst du dich so an? Yeah? It's election campaign. Yeah? It's nothing. You're not threatened. It's just in your mind. Yeah? The threat is not accepted. And what was happening is that somebody went into the garden of the person to put an AfD sign on the car, but the car was in the garden. Yeah? And so that was repeatedly done, and apparently overnight. And it showed the person, okay, there's somebody coming in my garden and trying to, and that was also an anti-racist activist in that area. And so that person felt very threatened, but hey, everybody said it's election, so it's not a threat. And one thing is really the economic resources and the far-right resources and the financial support as civic engagement. So a lot of the normalization is seen in forms of new forms of civic engagement, like the volunteer fire brigade. It wasn't really funded any longer, and then there was this good guy, he came along, his local shop owner and his friends helping out when organizing the party and also financially supporting the fire brigade. You know, but then they bring their flags, and then they bring their far-right flags, but for those who are there, you know, that's not our thing, but it's their thing. So this is really for me an example of this normalization, but the person we talked to really justified it. You know, we need the resources, and the guy is actually very nice, and what shall we do? There is no funding. And also you see that really structurally, maybe you have seen the debate on the sächsischen Migrantenorganisation and the withdrawal of the finances. You see also the withdrawal from finances from other civil society areas. So these were just some highlights or some examples where different actors at the local level are involved in different ways of this normalization process, which is not driven by the far right, but it is picked up by what is called the middle or the normal or the mainstream somehow. So what does it do if we look in opinion polls? And that is something we recently asked this March in the DeZIM-UAP, which is a national opinion, representative opinion poll. And these are preliminary findings. That means the data set is not fully complete. It's not bereinigt yet and not weighted yet. And so it's not the final data. But I thought I bring something along because it shows two interesting things. But before I do that, I would like to quote something from Vera, where I found evidence which I think support our also argument based on a survey on anti-Muslim racism as a factor of right-wing radicalization. And if I quote you correct, you found that 70% of Germans in the Vera study see Islam as backward religions that they describe as incapable of adapting to the present according to one item. Then this is to be understood as an indication of racism, because this statement is a factual biologistic or cultural description of the immutability of people, e.g. racism. So I see that somehow this is also reflected in your findings. But now I jump to our results. So what we did ask, and we here we differentiated from migrants, like first generation migrant background from Middle East, ex-UdSSR, EU, and Germany. These are the different categories. And we ask, how do you see the AfD? Do you see them as anti-democratic, extremist, racist? Do you see them as a party, as a normal party, as a party, as every party? And the normal is the gray line. And you see, first of all, that actually, independently of where you come from, you see them as anti-democratic, extremist, and racist. But still, for some, it doesn't matter. They see they are like that, but still they would also agree okay, but they're still a normal party. Yeah? So this seems to be, for me, a very normal, very expression of a normalization hypothesis if you look at the data. And of course, we have to look deep into that and test and do all this fancy statistical stuff we haven't done yet. But this is just for me to first look at the data where I think we can look at it. And then we can also see different things from different regions. But I don't even want to go now into details of the different regions. But I would like to go, of course, if you get back from the regions and look into voter behavior, then, of course, the only way where it's vice versa is for AfD voters. Yeah, here it's the only way where it's completely vice versa. So they totally not agree that it's undemocratic, racist, and they totally follow that it is a normal party. But what we also see, and this is a little, so if you agree that the AfD is a normal party, it's affected also different and other indicators. Of course, you're against then abolishing the AfD. We had this question on, are you supportive of an AfD verbot and the ban of the AfD, or a ban of the candidate of Höcke, of a very radical person in the AfD, or if you say, well, if you talk about abandoning or ban of a party, it's really about suppressing, it's not freedom, unliebsame Meinungen unterdrücken. What is that in English? Suppressing other opinions. Yeah? And so you see, if you agree the AfD is a normal party, you see it's much more connected to those items as well. That's the last thing I want to show you from the statistics, because here we asked also, what does it mean for you personally, and how does it affect your potential plans to migrate if the AfD wins 2 elections? Yeah, is it a wish? I could imagine to migrate. I have no wish to migrate. I have a hypothetical wish, and I actually start planning. And here we see substantial differences across different groups. And the groups we were talking today about a lot. Basically, the highest number of not only a hypothetical wish to migrate, but really starting to make plans. Okay, I was quicker than I expected. I thought I brought 10 million slides, but I come to my conclusion. Maybe we can go drinking beer earlier. Oh, I shouldn't say this on the mic. Okay, sorry, take it back. Long conclusion. No, concluding. Radicalized mainstream. What does everything mean in coming back to my concept? So basically, first, radicalization of the mainstream as normalizing anti-Muslim ressentiments and racism. The first thing we were looking at was the role of media, independent of far-right actors. So what we try to show is that independent of far-right actors, media accelerates anti-Muslim frames. The Islam is radical, associated with terror, to fear. And of course, this is based on existing or pre-existing anti-Muslim ressentiments and racisms, which have been grown in the society, but still it becomes a new quality. Yeah? So it picks up pre-existing and historically grown anti-Muslim stereotypes and racism, but it has this new quality. And not only far-right actors are crucial drivers of that debate. Actually, in mass media, they are not even driving the debate, not at all. Yeah, they are not visible. They are not really strongly visible in media. These are other actors picking it up, but not in linear ways. When we look in our qualitative results, it's really about disentangling the mainstream. It makes sense to talk about the mainstream when you talk about media, but in real life, it's really about the role of, in local level, local politics, civil society, public administration, even not forms, but firms, companies, looking into the role and interplay of various actors. And of course, I didn't talk about a very specific local context and the setting, but it also there, of course, has historical path dependencies and longer trajectories, in particular on the interactions of civil society and political administration. And here the resource factor is a very, very crucial one, because if public administration can't finance community stuff, civil society jumps in. And if the civil society is the good part of society, which we used to like civil society and democracy, it's so good, and we know it since Putnam and everything, yeah. But in many communities, it is not the case any longer in Germany. There's a disbalance because you have far-right civil society actors, and they have also resources, and they have their networks, and they jump in, yeah? And they jump in not by presenting their extremist views, not by being like straightforward Islamophobic, but by being the nice guy from the neighborhood and bringing in their ideologies very, very low-key. And in this way, radical as the new normal, tipping points in some communities or municipalities, I need to say, is it already reached? We have to see. So, of course, the question leaves many things unanswered. What is the exact difference to normalization and radicalized mainstream? Does it make sense to introduce a new concept? It leaves many questions unanswered. What is the opposite? Who is not part of the radicalized mainstream, and so forth. So don't ask me those questions afterwards, because I don't have the answers to those questions. But I would like to make potential contribution of that, that concept again. I think it helps to shift the focus from the far right to changes in actors, ideologies, institutions, and actions in general. And it looks different in the roots and processes and mechanisms of normalization from within the mainstream. It deconstructs the concept of the mainstream as a neutral norm, and it also focuses the attention and relevance of events. We also had a whole part on crisis, but also broader social conflicts, which activate then that radicalized mainstream. And it tries to highlight the ambiguities and even schizophrenic argumentations within the mainstream. And it tries to extend existing research on the far right, but also on the normalization debates from perspectives from marginalized and discriminated groups. So the graphs on the wish to migrate might be one example. Yeah? And it might make the point that there are potential tipping points, and the old mainstream is replaced through a radicalized new one as the new normal, not as maybe as something we should look into empirical, but also something to be aware of these latent processes underway. Where's the thank you slide? Thank you.